Hey, you're considering moving a rental property into a limited liability company? Well, you're going to want to watch this video because I'm going to go through the steps you should consider before you place your property into that LLC. All right, let's get started. Okay, so when it comes to moving a rental property into an LLC, you may think it's just quite simple, right? You just deed the property into the LLC, but stop. That can be a major mistake for you. You could cloud title to your property. You could create a tax situation for yourself that you didn't anticipate if you do not understand the steps that I am going to lay out for you. So it may be that you just want to take a piece of property like this and then set up your limited liability company here. And you see this a lot on the internet. People will tell you, all right, so if you want to put property into an LLC, all you need to do is file what we call a quitclaim deed or a QCD to transfer that property into the LLC. Now, the first thing I want to share with you, when you're transferring property into a limited liability company, do not use a quitclaim deed. Now, if you're not familiar with this deed, let me just explain it to you. A quitclaim deed states that, hey, I'm transferring whatever rights I may hold in this property to the grantee, the receiving property. So, if I filed a quitclaim deed transferring property into an LLC, then what I'm telling the world at large is that this LLC took this property and it doesn't even know if I own it. Now, you may have a hard time, wrapping your heads around this, but that's what the purpose of a quitclaim deed is. Whenever you're dealing with somebody who maybe went through a divorce, the title company would ask for a quitclaim deed from the prior spouse to state, hey, I have no interest in this property. And so you're just saying, whatever interest I may have, I don't own anything, but more importantly, I make no warranties of good title. Now, that is the important thing to consider here, that when you deed property into a limited liability company, always use a warranty deed to state that you warrant that you have good title. And the reason I say this is that a lot of our structures are built upon anonymity. We don't want our tenants to know that I am the owner of this LLC, and so I'm going to mask my ownership through the use of a Wyoming holding company. But here's the thing. It's really easy for an attorney to unravel this just by using this quitclaim deed right here. Because if I looked at a title transfer, let's say the title transfer went from John to an LLC that John's not associated with, but it was done via quitclaim deed, I would know that John owns that LLC. Why? Because no reasonable purchaser would buy a property from someone and accept a quitclaim deed. Number one, they couldn't get title insurance for it. Number two, I want them to warrant that they own the property. I would never buy property and say, oh, just give me a quitclaim deed and I feel really comfortable with this transaction. No, I want to make sure that if you pass on title that you don't have full title to, then I can go back and sue you because you've warranted your title. So that is a dead giveaway. Whenever you're transferring real estate into an LLC, if you use a quitclaim deed, that you're somehow associated with this limited liability company. So that's how you go about it. But that's not the first thing I really want to impress upon you, is that this is just the mechanics of getting it into an LLC. The legal means. What's more important here is what things do you need to analyze before you get to this point. That is what's critical, and this is where mistakes get made all the time with transferring property into limited liability companies. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves before we transfer property into the LLC, is there a mortgage on the property? Okay, so that is a concern that I have. If there's a mortgage on the property, the answer to this is yes. Then the second thing you need to ask yourself is, when did this mortgage get placed on the property? Was it pre-2020, say 22, pre-2020, 22? The reason I want to know this is because if it's pre-2022, then in that scenario, your mortgage is probably at a lower interest rate than it would be today. So if the answer to this question is yes, then the next question you need to ask yourself, is this mortgage owned by Freddie or Fannie? Okay, so now you have to ask that question as well. So how do you determine if your mortgage is held by Freddie or Fannie? Well, it's really simple. You just go to Google and you type in Freddie Loan Lookup Tool, or you type in Fannie Loan Lookup Tool, because you got to test both. And when you go to their website, you'll just put in your property address, you'll put in your information, your social security number, and then it'll tell you whether or not they own the mortgage. So if you get down to this, and the answer here is also yes, then you have a green light to move your property into a limited liability company, just like that. Move it right on in with a warranty deed. Why are you able to do this? Because the initial concern here was whether or not you had a mortgage on the property. And the reason we asked that question is because if you do have a mortgage on the property and it's not owned by Freddie or Fannie, then if you move that property into the LLC, your lender could accelerate the note, meaning they could force you to refinance at a much higher rate. And so that's why I asked you this question right here. Was it pre-2022? So let's say you had an investment mortgage that is at 4.5%, and now that same mortgage would cost you 9%. Do you want to risk moving property into an LLC where you may be forced to refinance? And most people will say no. So that's why we have to go through this analysis to determine whether or not that mortgage is now owned by Freddie or Fannie. Because Freddie or Fannie, their underwriting guidelines permit transfers into LLCs if they own the mortgage. So that's what we have to determine. Now, if the answer to these was no, it's not owned by Freddie or Fannie, well, then we'll get to that in just a second, what the solution is going to be. Okay, so now there's another aspect about this we want to look at. And so really, when I told you that you could move it into the LLC, well, we first need to look at number 2 as well before we make this leap right here. So number 2 is does your county or state charge a transfer fee? Okay, so if you move the property into an LLC, are they going to hit you with a transfer tax? Now, those transfer taxes can take on many different guises. Take example, Pennsylvania. If you move property in Pennsylvania into a limited liability company, there is a transfer fee there based upon the value of the asset when it moves in. So it's a percentage of that property's value. Now, if you jump down to Florida, they don't do it on the property value, they do it on the amount of the mortgage. So if you have a mortgage on the property and you transfer it into an LLC, then there will be a tax applied to that transaction. So that's the first thing we want to ask ourselves, is there a transfer tax? And then you want to know, will the property tax basis change? Okay, so this is the other one we want to check out, is whether or not the property will be reassessed to its current fair market value, because certain states have tax caps on their real estate. So that means your property can only go up, say, 5% a year. So for tax purposes. But if the market's been growing at 15% a year, but your taxes are capped at only 5%, that property may be under market value by 50%. And so you're paying property taxes based on, say, $200,000, but the fair market value is $400,000. Now, that is a concern. So if you have a property tax cap on your property in that place where it's located, then moving it into an LLC will probably or may create an issue for you. So we have to analyze these two right here. Will it be a transfer fee or will there be a property tax? Now, if the answer to both of these questions is a resounding no, well, then we go right back up to here and we're free to move the property into the LLC. But if there is a transfer tax, so if we're down here and we say, yes, there's a transfer tax, or yes, over here we had the problem because it's not owned by Freddie or Fannie, then this is what you should do to move that property into the LLC to minimize the acceleration clause or to minimize a transfer tax issue. How we accomplish that with our investing is we first start with a land trust. So here we'll set up a land trust. And when you're setting up the land trust, I've got plenty of videos on this. Definitely set it up with anonymity to keep your name off of title. You do not want to be the trustee here. Then you will deed the property into the land trust. Now, again, just like moving it into the limited liability company, the type of deed that we use is really important. So we wouldn't use a quitclaim deed to transfer real estate into an LLC. We're not going to use a quitclaim deed here to move property into a land trust. We will use a warranty deed. So I'll just put WD there. Now, just a little asterisk on that warranty deed. If you live in California, it's going to be a grant deed. I mean, there certain states may have a different term for their deeds, but essentially what you're doing here is the seller or the transferor, in this case, is warranting they have good title. So that's what's important. Always make sure you use that form of deed. Unless, well, there are a couple of states that do charge a transfer tax based upon the type of deed that you choose. Tennessee being one of them. So then we got to go back and rethink some of this. But anyways, this covers about 95% of the situations. So anyways, you move the property into the land trust, all right? So we get around the acceleration clause here, and we get around the transfer taxes that you'll find in many states. Now, it's not uniform. Again, just like the deed form, this doesn't work in Pennsylvania. So if you're in Pennsylvania, you're out of luck if you own property there. But in all the other states, we found this is not an impediment to moving property. So once it's in the land trust, then what we need to do is set up a limited liability company to be the beneficiary of this land trust. Because the land trust by itself, if we didn't put the beneficial interest, because initially you're going to be the beneficiary, and if you did not move your beneficial interest into this limited liability company, then if something happened with the property, if say a tenant slipped and fell on the property and they bring a lawsuit or a claim against the trust, the beneficiaries will also be named in that lawsuit. So we don't want to be a beneficiary in our land trust, with the exception of Florida. Florida is the only state that actually provides protections for land trusts. So in Florida, we can tweak it and we can make some other planning choices there. But in all the other states, if this property is located in Colorado, I'm not going to be the beneficiary of my trust. What I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer the property into the trust and then transfer my trust into the limited liability company to obtain asset protection. So when you're moving property into entities, an LLC, it's not as clear cut as a lot of people make it out to be. And I read this all the time on sites like Bigger Pockets, and I listen to podcasts from people that will say, investors say, oh, you just quitclaim deed the property in to the limited liability company. No, that is not the way to do it unless you're comfortable running the risk that your mortgage could be accelerated, or you're going to get slapped with a transfer tax. So go through this analysis before you make your next transfer into an LLC to make sure you're setting it up the right way. And if you'd like some assistance on that, click on in the show notes. There is a link for a free strategy session with someone here at Anderson, and we can walk you through that process and show you how it can be done the correct way. Guys, if you like the video, be sure to smash the like button and take care.